Okay. Well, Kristin, welcome to the Stepping Off Now podcast. You are the first in what I hope will be a series of author interviews on this podcast. And I'm so excited to have you as the first one because you've been so helpful for me over the last 10 months or so as I kind of get my feet wet in the traditional publishing world. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are and what you're about?
Thanks, Kendra. Yeah, I am very delighted to be here. It's been a little while since I have been interviewed on a podcast, so I'm definitely getting my wheels working again here. I'm Kristin Kisska. I am an author, and my debut novel is The Hint of Light. It was published by Lake Union Publishing in 2023, and I have just had a wonderful time in the publishing experience. So I am looking forward to chatting with you and being on Stepping Off Now. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I have read your novel and I enjoyed it very much. And we're going to get into the particulars of what you're writing about a little bit later in the interview. But let's start with this question. Was being an author, a novelist, something that you always dreamed about, or was this sort of a more later in life type of thing?
No, this is definitely my writer's era, if you want to call it that. I kicked off my academic and professional background is actually in finance. I worked on Wall Street way back in the day, and I had no intention of ever thinking about writing a novel, let alone being a published author. It was so far off of my radar. It's an iteration that started when I was working in 2008 during the recession. A lot of business really slowed down. And so I started reading a lot more. My kids were younger, and I used that, extra time to do some reading. And I was reading a Dan Brown novel. It was called The Lost Symbol. It was set in Washington, D.C., which is where I grew up. So I really felt like I knew his setting, that he was talking about the different places, the different experiences that were happening. I could feel myself in this book. And so I thought, well, maybe somebody should write something about my university that I graduated from, the University of Virginia. And then I started thinking, maybe I should write something set at the University of Virginia. It's hundreds of years old. It was established by Thomas Jefferson. It's this beautiful UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got all of these traditions and secret societies and very interesting nuances. So I wrote my first novel. It took a few years, but I wrote my first novel set there. And my husband was hoping it was a phase, but it wasn't because a few novels later, I wrote The Hint of Light, and that was ultimately published.
It's really interesting what you say about how this was something that happened during the recession. I started writing my novel that's out on sub right now around the pandemic. And I've heard that from a lot of creatives that something about the disruption can actually be really inspiring in some weird and almost perverse way for creative types. Uh, so the novel that you ended up getting published isn't actually the novel that you wrote for your first try. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
That is a fun journey, I have to say. Definitely not a path that most people have done. I wrote and read suspense and thrillers, and I watch true crime on TV, and that is really the genre that I'm driven to embody. I don't know if it's the fear elements in that or the page turning tension and conflict, but for that reason, I am really drawn to that genre. So the first couple of novels that I wrote and the novel that got me my literary agent were all set in that sphere. This novel was a little bit different. This was a passion project of mine. I didn't know that it would go anywhere. It was the second novel our agent took out on sub. So it was a surprise to me that this was the one that got legs. It is women's fiction. There's a little bit of suspense in there. There's a body, but it was not driven by this pulse thumping, page turning, must find out what happens next tradition of suspense, mystery, and thriller that I tend to migrate toward. So I This one is a little bit more character driven. It's more emotion driven. It is, like I said, it was a passion project. So it kind of wrote itself. I didn't set out with a specific objective of writing it, but it was something that I needed to personally get on the page. And I'm delighted that it's out there. But now, I have a very unique situation that on the spectrum of thrillers to, I don't know, call it just standard commercial fiction. Now I have one that's set in the middle. It's kind of this combination of thriller and women's fiction, and I'm trying to redefine my brand based on being able to write in both of those sections or a blend of both of those sections.
I did find your novel to be very page turning.
Oh, thank
But
you.
I think you told me that it's considered upmarket, which is also the genre that I write in.
Yeah, it's upmarket in that it let's see how to define that. It's it's upmarket in that, first of all, it's not squarely set in one single genre of, say, book club fiction, women's fiction, or suspense. It's a blend, but it's also, I feel that it's not that there's depth to it. There's a lot of gray area that the reader needs to slug through and make some choices and not appreciate, or both has to not agree with what the character is doing and the choices they're making and the consequences that might happen and fall out from that, but they understand where that character is coming from. So it really does require the reader to pull some of the weight, if you will.
I see. Yeah. I'm always trying to understand what exactly is genre. And I think a lot of us write across genres. And I do think that the market is becoming more open to that type of novel. Uh, One question I had when I was reading your novel is the twist ending. Hopefully, I'm not giving too much away with that.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Is that part of the thriller suspense genre, or was that just something you personally wanted to add?
The twist at the end is uh was built into the fabric of this book before I wrote page one. I knew that there was going to be this twist at the end. So I didn't sit back and say, "Ooh, how can I add some suspense in this? Oh, I know. This is how I'm going to do it." I knew that this character was going to make a choice that was going to be impactful. And so when I wrote the book, even though quite a few things changed along the way during edits, during revisions, that was a piece of it that was part of this puzzle from the absolute outset. So I knew writing it what was going to happen, and my goal was to make sure that it landed with 2 feet on the ground. I needed my readers to have that aha moment. So when my early readers would read it and perhaps guess the ending, or I kind of saw that coming, I would specifically ask them, where did you see this? What tripped it? What triggered this? Because it needed to happen organically. It had to fit with the book, but I really did want it to be a surprise. And every time they shared with me, oh, when the character said X, or when, this person did that, I went back to that specific section and smoothed it out so that by the time the world had this book, most readers, even if they were looking for some unusual twist at the end, most readers would not outright guess what it was. And I think I've been pretty successful with that. It took a lot of early readers to get to this point.
Yes, indeed, you were successful because I didn't see it coming at all. And mystery is my favorite
Woohoo, mission
genre.
accomplished.
So.
My big fear now is that now that this is out and that twist has been noteworthy among readers, I'm a little bit concerned that I now have to deliver that with other books too. And that's a tall order because I really worked hard on that one.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, which is this is a point I certainly hope that I will get to someday, but the pressure of that sophomore effort, especially when you're in a situation like yourself where your first novel is outside of the genre that you feel most comfort in. How are you handling that?
Oh, it depends on the day. The sophomore intimidation is absolutely 100% a real thing, that book. It's as if you are standing at base camp on Mount Everest and getting ready to climb it again. You've done it once, you know you can do it, but you also have this little amnesia, like, "How did I get to that, from point A to point B? And I have to do it again." And there's this expectation that you will do it easier. It'll be easier. It'll be fine. But when you're standing in this particular case, sitting in front of a blank screen, typing your words, trying to deliver another deeply emotional, page turning story that people will invest 10 hours in to read a book, it's still intimidating. You still have to do all the work. You still have to make all those revisions. You're going to have as many revisions, if not more. So it's difficult for sure. On the other hand, I keep having to remind myself, I've published, I have done this, I can do this again. And so you have that nice counterbalance, but you have to be your own cheerleader.
What I'm finding with my second novel that I'm currently trying to write while my first is on sub is that it almost feels like it's an entirely different experience in every way. And I sort of wonder if each novel is like what I imagine. I'm not a mother, but if I were, each child would just be their own person. And you can't really predict what your experience is going to be like the second or third time around based on precedent.
Well, as a mom, every child is different. 100%. And books are book babies. They have a birthday. They have it's a lot of planning up front. And no matter what you plan up front, you can't necessarily predict how it's going to be received, because once it's in the world, a lot like a child, it's received by everybody else. It's no longer mine all by myself, like when I was typing away and editing, revising, and doing things, that then it was mine. Now it's all based on the reader's experience and what the lens that they bring to the book and how they interpret it and what resonates with them. It's no longer mine. I've written it and I've read it, and that's great. It's wonderful that my name is on that cover, but the book now belongs to readers, and that's an important thing to have. So writing your second novel, yes, it's absolutely going to be different. And it should be, because the last thing you want to do is have some formulaic approach to writing. The other thing is, it's up to the reader to decide if they prefer one over the other. You have to disassociate yourself and your own, you can't take things personally that readers say. Some readers will take issue with something in the book that the next reader absolutely loved and would cling to. In with regard to the twist at the end, I've had readers tell me, "Oh, yes, that was exactly what she should have done," and other readers saying, "Are you kidding me? How, why, what? Let's talk about this. I have words." So it's really been an amazing experience just to see how other people are accepting and welcoming this story into their own experience and fabric and their responses.
How do you handle critical feedback when you get an email that someone just hated it, or has that not happened?
I haven't gotten an email about that. There have been some negative reviews. The first thing is, I don't read reviews. The reviews belong to other people. I am if someone feels very strongly about sharing information, they sometimes tag me and I will see it then. And thankfully, I haven't gotten blindsided by that. But I do know that I've got a couple reviews that are not 5-star. I have seen that. I don't read them though. That said, with my early readers, I love it if they enjoy the book, but I can't. That doesn't help me with my revisions. I need to know what's not clear, what's not logical, what's what people might skim. I need to know everything that's wrong with that book. So by the time you do that 78,000 times, you've developed a bit of a thick skin. You don't take it quite as personally after all of this. And having been writing now since 2008, so that's 13 years. Writing is all about rejection. It's rejection from querying literary agents. It's rejection from publishers. It's rejection from readers. Rejection is at every single turn. And if you took it all personally, there's been some that have hit harder than others, some comments. But if you take all of that personally, don't go into writing. It's just not a good career path for anybody who's going to have depressive episodes because of their writing. You really can't take all that personally. Learn from it. Take it and learn from it and perfect your craft and perfect your story and perfect your characters, but also write for yourself. If you write a universally accepted character, chances are they're going to be very, very, very bland. You don't want bland when you're writing. So you do want to be unique, and anytime you're unique, you're not going to be universally accepted. So there's this sweet spot that you have to find that works for you, and then you have to coach yourself anytime something happens or someone says something that doesn't feel comfortable.
I will say, as someone who does struggle a lot with dealing with feedback of any kind, positive or negative, and who struggles with mental health issues, I have often wondered if publication of any kind is for me. And that's one of the things I do talk about on my podcast, ways forward for people like me who do struggle in that way. But you're right, it is a very difficult road for people such as myself.
If I can give one piece of advice,
Mm.
I mean, you did say that you struggle with the good news too, but so I hope that you can overcome that because there is, the better you get, the more good news you will get, and that's the goal. What I have done is I have kept a Word document on my computer, and anytime I get some compliment, any kind of compliment on my writing, on my books, on, achievements, milestones that I've made, good things about my writing, I jot it down on my Word document, and I just have bullet points just for anything that comes my direction, people reaching out to me to let me know something resonated, something did good. And I call it my wall of fame. So if I ever go a stretch where I really kind of wonder, why am I kicking myself? Why am I trying to move this big boulder when I don't seem to be getting any place? I can go back into my wall of fame document and just reread some of the things that people have said to me along the way these last 18 years and just 15 years, however many. I'm not mathing today, but you can just rewash yourself with the confidence, reboot, and just, it's all things that have been said to you. So I highly recommend anybody venturing into anything creative where, especially if there's a long duration between idea to completion, keep a wall of fame for yourself. Do something. Maybe it's a bulletin board where you're sticking post-it notes, or maybe it's a, a note on your phone or whatever. Just keep a list, a running list of things that people have said to you that are not flattery as much as really, truly complimenting you just to help you.
I'll give that a try. It's So my issue with positive feedback is that immediately my mind wants to make me disbelieve it, or, oh, they're just being nice. But I am getting better. You're right. I'm getting better at handling that. Uh, Before we move on, I want to ask you about getting an agent. I think that this is a question, especially wannabe writers who want to traditionally publish are always interested to hear because everyone's story is so unique.
Mhm.
Could you just give us a summary of how you got together with your agent?
Sure. And it'll be funny if we share an agent. So it'll be funny if she actually ends up ever hearing this. Love you. Thank you. I am
Yay.
so grateful that I queried like most writers do. So I did not know our agent prior to her offering representation. I say that at the same time, I actually had followed her on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter for years. So I knew another one of her authors. And when I found out that she was representing that author, who I also really enjoyed, um, I started following her and I reached out. So when I was querying my first book, the one that was set at UVA, I reached out to her and I said, hello, you don't know me, but, and I just explained why I was reaching out to her and the pitch and who I was. And she requested my novel and it was, wonderful. Now, let's fast forward. She gave me some notes on it and I had to do it's in the industry it's called an R&R, revise and resubmit to the agent. And she did not ultimately sign me on that book. There were issues with the story and I get it. Uh, but she said, next time you have a book and you're querying, please reach out to me. So that first book, I submitted over 100 queries, got a bunch of requests, no offer of representation. My second book, I knew that our agent wanted to see it. So she was one of the first agents that I reached out to. She requested it immediately. Within a week, she offered representation. And so at that point, on my second book, I had only queried 5 agents. It was my first batch that went out. I told all the other agents, thank you, but I have found my literary relationship and I accepted her offer of representation. And that was actually 5 years ago yesterday. So we just celebrated our agentversary. Now she went out and went on submission with that book. That one didn't sell. So she went on submission with this second book, and that one did. So I have to say that I have been living by the rule of twos. I got my agent with my second book. I got my um, publisher with the second book she went out on sub on. So the second book I published again will probably be my bestseller.
Fingers crossed for you.
We
uh,
can dream. It's
yeah,
all uphill from there.
I think that your story is not unusual, that it can take multiple attempts, many years, even after you get an agent, to finally get that publisher to bite. It's such a long road, and that's what I often tell my podcast listeners, that you really have to be able to enjoy the actual writing, or else you'll never be able to survive the ups and downs of this path of being a creative, of being an artist. Why don't you tell us about your writing practice, what that looks like, if it's changed over the years? Do you write every day, that type of thing?
It depends. So, to let's go back to the beginning. My writing practice, I am a morning person. I have my most creative bursts in the morning. Honestly, while it's still dark out, is when I seem to be most creative. And if I can get a few words on the page, wake up early while my household is still quiet, and I can dive into my story and move it forward, move that story forward, I have a great day. If I am behind the game and I'm coming in midday or later in the day to write my words, I struggle getting momentum. So I really do try to do a morning writing sprint. Back in the day, I used to avidly participate in a group of writers called 5 a.m. Writers Club. And this was on Twitter. I'm not sure where they've migrated to since the social media platforms have kind of changed their vibes. But we would check in between 5 and 6 in the morning. Hey, I'm here. Drop a GIF in Twitter, and at the end of it, you kind of just go back and see like who all was in. It was sort of like the writer's water cooler, if you will, every morning. And it was just a little bit of accountability and fun knowing that you weren't the only person who was crazy enough to wake up at 5 in the morning to get words on the page. But it really did start a habit. And I did that for years and participated in that. But as far as writing daily, it really kind of depends where I am in the phase of a book. So drafting a book is one element of getting a book to paper. The next is the revisions. And the revisions are where the magic happens. It's where you can kind of make changes and do things. I have a very difficult time personally drafting a project while revising a project. I kind of just need to be in the headspace. So when I'm revising a project, I'm not usually writing unless I need to rewrite a chapter or do something like that for a specific project. I don't juggle between two storylines easily. I may have to fine tune that as a skill. I may have to push through that at some point, but I have been fortunate enough to, up until now, to be a one project at a time kind of person. So that's sort of how I do
So
things.
when you say you might have to become skilled at that, that would be because you might have a project that's currently in editing phase with your publisher, but also trying to work on your next effort. Is that what you mean?
Correct. It's a nice problem to have to be on those. For example, if an author, now I don't have one of these, but as a case, if an author has a multi-book contract, you'll have one in editing, as you said, one that's being drafted with a deadline that has to come, and then like say it's a three-book contract, that third book, you need to be creating, plotting, getting approval so that then that can move into the drafting stage. So you might have several stories and all due with different deadlines, but your publisher won't necessarily change one deadline because you're working on another deadline. You just have to meet everything when it's ready. So with this particular book, I had a one book contract, and that allowed me to focus in its entirety on this book, even though I was trying to come up with a new idea fresh behind it. But I was able to 100% dedicate my time and effort to the publishing experience, which is sort of the timeline between signing your contract and actually publishing the book has a lot of different steps to it as well, that it requires author dedication. So it's not as if the publisher just takes it and is like, oh, by the way, here you go, it's published. Woo. It's you're very involved in that process.
Hopefully, I'll find out soon.
Yes, you will. We're sending you all the vibes.
I've heard it takes about 2 years, and there would be multiple edits that you go through, and then a proofread. And uh, your experience, you've told me before, with traditional publishing has been very positive, which is such a wonderful thing to hear because you hear uh, so many nightmare stories that are out there circulating. But I wanted to ask you to explain your reasoning behind traditional publication versus self-publication, because when we were talking about this before, you said something really interesting about how it ties in with your business background.
Well, as I mentioned, my education and my professional background is in finance and marketing. And in coming into the publishing industry, what I really truly valued that a publisher can bring is not just the product, it's the pricing, the promotion, the other parts of marketing and the distribution. I didn't have the capability to create distribution channels. I didn't have the capability to or the insider knowledge to do promotions other than digital media on my own social media accounts and website. I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't have the contacts. I'd never written a press release. I didn't even know where to start with that. And what I really wanted to do was write. So my goal, as I mentioned, the first couple of novels I wrote didn't land publishers. My goal was to park those on a shelf, revisit those later, and keep writing new content that hopefully would get published by a traditional publisher. And I was willing to wait, and assuming my literary agent was willing to wait with me and keep shopping new content, I was willing to wait until I wrote something that a publisher was willing to purchase. That happened with this book. So I was really, really, really lucky. I got struck by lightning and it was wonderful. I was willing to wait until I was, a couple more decades of just writing and fine tuning and creating to do that. And then I figured once I had a solid reader base, so hopefully go through the traditional publishing a few times, I might go back and revisit some of my old content, polish it up, freshen it up, and perhaps at that point do some sort of hybrid or self-publishing with my old books. But I needed to wait. I wanted to have the publisher's professional experience to help build a reader base, create that promotional opportunity, and utilize their distribution capabilities. That's what they do. That is, the X factor that they bring to this entire puzzle is the business side of things that I didn't know yet. And I was absolutely delighted to be able to pass those things off to the publisher. Now, I contributed heavily to the promotional side of things once it was published, but they already had contacts and who do you send it to get literary reviews and so on and so forth. It was just something that I was just so grateful to observe, but not have to try to push that boulder myself.
You're like the dream client that you come in already with a head for business on your shoulders, because I think that's something that a lot of writers don't maybe expect, is that they have to become business people to some extent. And that puts a lot of us outside of our comfort zones. So it's great that that is already your comfort zone. What I'm looking forward to the most is actually getting the editing help to make my book better. To me, that seems like the primary benefit of traditional publication.
They really did help me take my I'm calling it a product now, my book to a new level. They absolutely, I just had phenomenal developmental editing opportunities with Lake Union. And it was interesting because you're selling a book, someone's purchased the book, they're excited about it, it's on their publishing calendar. So when you get that first editorial letter, you're like, whoa, I thought they liked it. You have to sit back and take it in as a big picture. And it's up to the author to decide, okay, yes, I agree with this. No, I don't agree with this. And this is why. It's still your story. But when I took a step back and my developmental editor had given me some ideas, like I really didn't think I didn't buy that this particular character was going to get to this spot. What can you do? Or there's a certain reveal that happened 75% of the way through the book that she felt readers should know that sooner. So I moved it. But then that meant that the second part of the book had to be kind of re-engineered to accommodate for the different information that the reader knew sooner and therefore the characters knew sooner. So it was a big boot camp, if you will. But by the end of that process, I really love this book. She helped me take it to a level I didn't even see it could get to prior to her handiwork.
So, did you feel that you were able to push back on certain things if they just didn't suit your story?
I pretty much accepted everything. Some of them I made deeper changes than others. And I'm trying to think back to what I might have tweaked versus overhauled. But I think I worked on every single element that she raised. I valued her input. I thought it was fantastic. Tight turnaround. I had to do the very first overhaul in 3 weeks, and that's probably the fastest I had ever done anything. And then we did 2 more iterations of developmental edits. Fortunately for me, each iteration was softer or lighter and lighter. So by the time it was done and I had turned it in post developmental edits, it had 3 overhauls. but not it was that first one that was really the muscle building that took my breath away.
I can't wait. It sounds thrilling.
Don't plan any trips or vacations or anything during that time. Just give yourself that space.
I hardly ever leave my house, so I don't think it'll be a problem. You also had to deal with a whole saga around your title. There was a title change.
There was. So while my agent was on sub, we were using the original working title that I had for this story, which was My Guardian Dear. And that's a couple of references. This book deals with a lot of different guardianship relationships, parent child, grandparent child, single parenting, things like that. So there are a lot of guardianship themes in here. So I thought that was one reason why My Guardian Dear worked. But the other one was that there's a prayer that's referenced in here. Now, this is not a religious book at all, but there's a prayer that's referenced, that a children's prayer called My Guardian Dear. And that was the second reference in this book. So I thought, ooh, yay, I'm touching on this title twice in the book. This is great. Well, my agent took it out on sub, and we really didn't get very many hits at all, at all. And I reached out to her thinking maybe it was going to go the way of the first book that she had taken out on sub for me. And I said, should we shelve this for a little while? And she said, well, what if we change the title? Maybe it's the title is conveying that it's more of a religious book than you intend to have written. And so we brainstormed, and we came up with a line in the book where it's directly taken from, and it's a very big moment in the book. And that title was Secrets We Bury. And the line from the book is, someone's telling my main character, the secrets you bury the deepest hurt you the most. So we retitled it. I changed the document that my agent was going to take out to publishers. The only thing I changed for the title, not another word in this book was changed. And I sent it back to her. Within 2 weeks, we had 2 publishers interested in the book. And so really, titles are very meaningful. You do, even though they will change along the way, you do want to have a good, catchy title. Lesson learned. So we went through, I sold the book. We did the announcement in Publishers Marketplace. I'm kind of promoting the book on social media, and we get through developmental editing and copy editing, and we're coming up to the point where the cover page is going to be created with a graphic designer. And news comes back from the publisher's marketing team that I need to change the title, because there was another book that had already been published by them that was just a little bit too similar to Secrets We Bury, and they didn't want to take out a book and cannibalize on it and cause confusion in the marketplace. Fair point, and that one's already published. That one can't be changed. So we went back to the drawing board, and this time it took a long, long, long time. Many nights of just brainstorming and new ideas and scanning the book and opening it up to a random page saying, like, well, what can we take it from? We had a list of 20 or so titles that marketing shot down. So finally, my acquisition editor came back and she said, what about The Hint of Light? And that is taken from the very last chapter of the book. And it's a poignant moment in the book. And I thought, okay, let's roll with it. This is great. It's fine. It's from a line in the book. That's fine. But we had one more tiny round of little copy edits to go. It was the very last time, and I got special permission. At that point, no big changes can happen in the book. It's just this period, that comma, this, some consistency things. It's just the very, very, very final round of edits. But I did get a waiver to add a very small part in the epilogue so that I could have a second drop of the title in the epilogue as well. So in one point, it's a very positive spin on The Hint of Light, and in the second point, it's a different take on The Hint of Light. Both of them are aha moments, but not both of them are good. And so I was very grateful, because I also have book club questions in the back of that. And I was able to add another book club question specific to the title. And in the conversations I've had with book clubs, it's been very exciting to hear them talk about the different ways the title can be played.
Yeah, I love your title, and it was very gratifying to kind of get to the end of the novel and sort of have that. It was almost like another aha moment for me at the end. Something that you just mentioned that I hadn't realized before I got into this whole publishing game is that authors write their own book club questions.
Yes, yes, they do. And that is
Yikes.
that is something that I kind of had to do on the fly after I signed my contract. I had no idea that that was also something that was going to be in my wheelhouse. And now I know. Coming in. So
My mind is already churning, thinking up ones for my novel.
what I ended up doing was I went to the library when I realized, and it was my option. I didn't have to include questions, but I was like, this is a book club book. I want questions. I want discussion questions. So I went to the library and checked out a bunch of books that had questions in the back, and I brought them and just started looking at the questions that were asked. And I was able to select or see patterns in the kinds of questions and then select some that I could modify and utilize for my book and just to ignite discussion. But as it turns out, I have been invited to a number of book club meetings that have discussed my book, and I absolutely love them. There no two book clubs are alike, and no two book club conversations about my book are alike. And I've learned so much about my book. But I have found I was able to start every book club off with a single question and go around to each member, and they had to answer the question, and that started the whole conversation. Then 2 hours later, and probably a lot of wine, everybody was still like deep diving into these characters with their own lens. It was amazing. And that question was, I have four main characters in here: Kyle, Margaret, Allie, and Hannah. And I said, are you team Kyle, team Margaret, team Allie, or team Hannah, and why? And as we don't even get around the room, and people are already like, no, 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 but what about, but what did it? So it's just amazing to get that. I wouldn't have had to have written any other questions if I had known that.
It's a great one. I'm definitely Team Kyle.
Yay. Love
And one
Kyle.
of the reasons is that his story is pretty near and dear to my own heart. And I want to get now into sort of the meat of your novel.
Sure.
But you write about some pretty heavy topics, and they actually are very similar to the ones that I write about in my own debut work. One of them is addiction, and related to that is grief. When you started writing this novel, were those subjects ones you intentionally wanted to explore, or did they sort of come up in the story?
They were intentional. They were foundational to the story. And the little personal note that I can add here is that Kyle was inspired by someone who passed away, who was very, very near and dear to me. And so he was himself struggling with alcohol addiction. And when I patterned this character Kyle after this personal relationship, I definitely wanted to capture the essence of who he was, which was a very, very, very good person who was struggling with his own demons and why. And this is a work of fiction. It's a novel. So the inspiration of the character, Kyle, came from my personal experience, but nothing else did. So, what this really was a manifestation of a wish. I wish this person had left us someone that we could have found that could have helped fill that void. And so that was the inspiration behind this novel. Knowing that Kyle wasn't going to survive the novel meant that grief would be involved. And so you could not really disassociate one with the other. But I really wanted to show Kyle as my unlikely hero. you cheer for him, you groan with him, I wanted readers to experience something that might be outside of what has touched their lives. But that was a big misunderstanding that I had. After writing Kyle and publishing this book, I found that so many people have someone in their life or themselves who is addicted to substance. So many people. And so I have trigger warnings in here at the beginning of the story. And at the end, I have a list of resources that my publisher suggested that I include, which I was more than happy to include. Because if anyone is dealing with even a fraction of what's in this book, make sure you have good support. And so I also have a disclaimer that this was really because it was based off of my observational experience of this one person, that this was not supposed to be universally applied, that this is one data point in the spectrum of addiction and very complex and complicated circumstances, and how one person handled the situation. But what I found was this overwhelming sense of people reaching back out to me saying, this is exactly what I experienced. Thank you for giving this voice to this experience. Thank you for being vocal. Thank you for sharing this. And people have used this book. They've written to me and said, I have used this book to share with other family members about what's going on so they can hop inside Kyle's mind and see. And I have just been so grateful. Those are the messages that I'm adding to my wall of fame. The people who they make me cry every time they come in. They're just so heart-wrenching, but also just so wonderfully supportive and fulfilling. And I really have given me this post-publication sense that I have done right by people who struggle with alcoholism. So I hope that that is universal. No one's reached out to say that I have not, that I was off base or out of my lane or whatever. Everyone has really kind of come back to me and been very supportive and grateful.
It's such a beautiful way, I think, to honor the memory of your loved one is to write with such compassion and show the humanity of this person, your character in the novel. Was writing this novel a cathartic experience, or was it challenging in unexpected ways?
Oh, both. Absolutely, all of the above. It was cathartic in that, first of all, so I wrote the story has two timelines. It's before and after, and you find out fairly quickly as a reader that it's before Kyle's death and after Kyle's death. And so the chapters flip-flop, but when I wrote it, I wrote all the before chapters, the epilogue, and then all the after chapters. So I wrote it chronologically. Since it's before and after Kyle's death, the before chapters all include Kyle, the after chapters don't, obviously. Writing the before chapters was the cathartic time. Writing the Kyle chapters in specific was almost like, I don't know, otherworldly. I was inside Kyle's head writing this, but it's almost like Kyle and my loved one were inside my head, and I was just transcribing. I never set out to fully think and understand and pre-plan what was going to go on with the struggle, the internal struggle that this character was experiencing on the page. So as it unfolded, I was witnessing the unfolding. I wasn't driving the bus, if you will. So it was amazing to me how that happened. And I got to know my loved one even better because of the experience of actually being in that space, which I am so grateful for. It was so healing and so cathartic to me, even though I knew going in that this character was not going to survive, as neither did my loved one. So knowing the fate, it still was a beautiful experience for me. The real one of the more challenging things about this was the character of Allie. Now, Allie is a young woman, and she is in both the before and the after chapters. And I was really worried about readers getting confused since, it's before, it's after. She needed to have two different emotional growth arcs. And I didn't want to truly confuse readers. So, what I ended up doing ultimately was in the before chapters, I had her as a senior in high school. And in the after chapters, I set her as a college student. So it was that bridge between the two, because I find that people experience a big growth in maturity during that time. Plus, she had in the after chapters some grief experiences as well. So she really was a very different voice in both of those timelines. But I really struggled to differentiate her before and her after. And even so, all my early readers, especially, I would just say, okay, let's talk Allie. What wasn't working? What was? I really kind of felt that was just so much finesse to require that I even considered taking her out of one of the timelines, but she had weight to pull in both. So I really couldn't take her out. And I just had to make it work. And that was, about 50% of my revisions all handled Allie and being able to bridge those two timelines.
What really stands out to me about your novel is how you portray the different iterations of grief in different relationships with the character. And the one that really impacted me the most, interestingly enough, is his mother and what she went through trying to be his champion after his death. How did you sort of get into her head?
Good question. It was not as easy as it was for Kyle. I had to channel some of my own parental experiences, and I haven't dealt with any of that or any of the trauma and the backstory that's in there personally. But I had to be empathetic, and I had to wonder, like, how do you do this? How do you, what would I do I in that situation? And that's kind of where being a natural born worrier helped. It is very easy for me to jump the worst case scenario in any circumstance. Like, what do we really, let's talk risk. What do we really need to know? And in going there and in worrying about the worst case scenario, I've had a lot of practice. Uh, and just being a mom, I have 3 kids. The 2 girls came first. My son came after, and God love him, but my girls did not prepare me for my son. He just, is a climber. So it's like at 2 years old, I would find him on top of our pantry trying to get the cereal down, or climbing into the front load washing machine, or dashing into traffic, or doing this and that. That he survived childhood is only because I was always worried about the worst case scenario, and trying to do things. So that experience was helpful. And we had enough close calls where my heart just sank, like, oh my gosh, if we had been 2 seconds later, what would have happened? And so it wasn't such a stretch to go to that space of grief and imagine what the horrible circumstance that would be to have lost a child. And then the hope of, wait a second, there's something, there could be someone else, and to kind of go after. And for readers who don't know the premise behind the story, it's this grieving woman, Margaret, who finds out after her son Kyle passes away that he may have fathered a child. And so she goes on this desperate search for this granddaughter she never knew existed. And that is to trade the obsession's the wrong word, but the just the overwhelming, all-consuming grief with a glimmer of hope is something that I wanted to gift her. I wanted to give this grieving mom something to live for, something to look for. So
The hint of light.
yeah, the hint of light.
Yeah. One thing that I've heard, and I think this is certainly true of myself as a writer, is that we tend to explore the same topics or same group of topics over and over and over in our writing in different ways. Do you think that in your current work that you're writing now, do you still deal with grief, or have you moved on to other topics?
I'm actually moving on to another topic right now. So I went back and wrote another thriller, which is my traditional uh, kind of medium to write in. Um, but I actually just started this week writing another story. And instead it's a little bit more like this one. It's a little bit more book club with some suspense. And it's a story about friendships gone wrong on this one. So this was parenting. The hint of light was parenting, and the choices you make and the consequences of those choices, you might make them in the very best of intentions for someone's benefit, but they can go horribly wrong with consequences. This next one explores friendships and the things that you do with friends and for yourself. It's a little bit looser because you don't have that blood connection that you do with parenting, but I'm exploring more consequences, less grief. So you do still grieve loss of friends, even if they are just no longer in your sphere. Like there's a falling out or something. There is still this grief, but it's a little bit different than grieving the loss of a person who basically inhabits every cell of your body. So
It's really interesting how much our topics are similar that we write about, and maybe that's because they're actually universal topics. But my novel out on sub right now is about friendships and friendships ending and traumas and friendships. And
oh my, I can't wait
currently,
to read it.
well, I hope you will get a chance to.
Yes. Gimme, grabby hands.
But the current novel I'm writing right now, my second, is actually about what we were just talking about, parenthood and choices, which is a real stretch for me, not being a parent to anything other than dogs, which is not the same thing as kids, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah. No, dogs are great too. Love them. Absolutely love them.
But much, much easier.
They don't talk back as much.
They try. They try. I have one who definitely talks back. Well, Kristin, this has been a wonderful conversation. Is there any question that you would have liked me to have asked that I didn't?
Well, I'm kind of grateful that you haven't asked, what's next, because what's next really is this book that I'm writing right now. And I would love to share more, but we're really just in the baby steps kind of
The
stage with
new
that one.
one, the one
So
you just started.
the one I just started. Yeah. And, here's hoping next time we talk, we will both have good news on the subbing front. So sending all the good publishing vibes for that. Um, Really, honestly, just thank you for having me on your podcast. I am so delighted to be here and sharing some time with you and getting to know you and your writing too.
Yeah, this has been fantastic, and I'm glad that you pushed me to do it in video form as well as just the sound recording.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. So, just to follow up, readers can reach me at my website, which is KristinKisska.com, and I'll spell that KristinKisska.com. You can find my debut novel, The Hint of Light, anywhere that online the books are sold. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook and at Kristin Kisska Author and even a few other places, but those are the primary ones.
I have one final wrap up question because I found this so fascinating, and it goes to show that cover design is not random. Why don't, why don't you give people the sort of backstory of this cover design and the cool little experience you had related to that.
Okay, absolutely. I love, love, love this cover for so many reasons, but the story is set in Chicagoland. It's a place that I lived and it was near and dear to me. So even though this is an exploration of characters and an inner journey, it was wonderful to kind of showcase a few of the nicer landmarks of Chicago. So the cover is set on Lake Michigan. For those who are very familiar with Chicagoland, it is on Lakeshore Drive. It is as you are driving south on Lakeshore Drive, you can see the skyline in front of you, including the Hancock Building and the Navy Pier and the Drake Hotel. So, and there's a woman standing at the lakefront holding an orange umbrella. And the orange umbrella, I call it tangerine in the story, but that is a moment in the story as well. And the colors in the moody sky is blue and orange. Now, few reasons that I absolutely love this. One of them is, as I mentioned, I went to UVA as an undergrad, the University of Virginia, and our school colors are orange and blue. So when I saw this design for the first time, I absolutely flocked to it uh, because of just school pride. But having grown up in, or not grown up, having lived in Chicagoland, I had to go back right after this was published for a conference, and I was determined to find this very spot on Lake Michigan. I knew that it existed because I've driven Lakeshore Drive so many times, but I was going to find this spot, and I did, and it's called Concrete Beach. And so I had brought with me the book, and I brought with me my trusty orange umbrella, and I went and filmed myself recreating this cover by myself, holding my orange umbrella on Concrete Beach, looking at that skyline. And it was actually a very significant moment for me. I put it on my Instagram. If you scroll down, you can find it. It is just a very fun experience to recreate my own debut novel's cover.
I love that story. Well, thank you again for doing this interview. And we are all looking forward to your next novel. And please, all my listeners, check out The Hint of Light. It's a really beautiful novel.
Thank you, Kendra. I'm delighted to be here.